right, here we go. It's the reproductive system. And I don't know if you guys need the pep talk that my seventh graders need, because I also am the sex ed teacher at my school and we go over all this stuff in much less detail. But just think of the reproductive system as any other system, just like the digestive system, the circulatory system. We all have them, so not a big deal. I've taught this also in physiology for about 10 years, so to me, it ain't no thing. So if that makes you feel less uncomfortable, then great. All right, so let's just dive right in. Question of the day. How do vasectomies and birth control pills work? And just a quick note here, when it comes to the ovarian cycle, which is all of this right here, it's a lot. And so when you get to the study guide before you take the exam, the answers to these questions are included on the study guide, just so they're all in one place there for you to make it easier to study. So hopefully that is helpful. And we're going to start with the pre-lecture assignment, which I am going to go over today. So again, if you feel confident with this, go ahead and skip past this part. But we need to know the anatomy of the male reproductive system. So the first structure are the testes. And this is where the sperm is produced and also the male sex hormones, and they lie within the scrotum. So structure right here. The epididymis is our next one. Make sure I spell this right. Are the ducts where the sperm mature. So here in this picture, that would be right here, this structure. The vas deferens. And sometimes you'll hear it called ductus deferens. In fact, I think that's what the book calls it. Is where the sperm are stored, and smooth muscles here cause ejaculation. Oh, I guess it doesn't say that in the book. But let's find those on our model here. It's this tube right here. And you can see it goes all the way up and over here through eventually the prostate. I think we'll get to that. Next is the urethra. So this is sperm from the ejaculatory ducts enter here, and it's a common duct for both sperm and urine. So that's what we're looking at here. And seminal vesicles produce the majority of fluid in semen. It produces fructose, which nourishes the sperm. So if you think about it, these sperm got to swim a long ways to get to where they're going. They need a lot of energy. And fructose has a similar structure to glucose. So the mitochondria in the sperm use that as a source of how they can make ATP, so they can do their little swimming thing to try to get to the ovum or the egg. The prostate gland is a donut-shaped gland that surrounds the upper portion of the urethra, just below the bladder. And this makes semen basic. We're talking about like pH scale here. So again, here's our prostate gland, and you've probably heard of enlarged prostate glands, and you can see why this would cause problems with urination and also with ejaculation. So there is our pre-lecture. Let's move on to the next page, spermatogenesis. So spermato is referring to sperm, and Genesis, I think we've talked about this before, is like in the Bible, the Genesis is like the creation of or the beginning of. So think of this as the formation of sperm. And spermatogenesis generates 4 sperm cells. and it occurs in the seminiferous tubules in the testes. So let me find, well, this picture here will work. If you look closely at this, and I hope I don't ruin ramen noodles for you forever, but it looks like a bunch of ramen noodles packed in there in the testes. And if you were to stretch them out, don't we love these comparisons? There are 8 feet. My notes say 8 feet. That's not right. Anyway, it equals out to 3 football fields if you were to stretch them out. And if we go back to meiosis, remember that meiosis versus mitosis, and meiosis is where we make gametes, where we make eggs and sperm, results in haploid gametes. So mitosis resulted in 2 identical diploid cells, whereas meiosis results in 4 haploid unique cells. Sertoli cells are found in these seminiferous tubules, and they support and nourish the sperm and help in sperm production. So think of them as little nurses for these baby sperm. And again, those are found here inside the testes in these ramen-noodle seminiferous tubules. Okay, interstitial cells. One type is called Leydig cells. These are in between the tubules. And they secrete testosterone. So if we were to uncoil one of those ramen noodle seminiferous tubules and take a cross section, this is what we would see inside. So these are the Sertoli cells around the outside here that are kind of nourishing and nursing the sperm as they develop. And these are the interstitial cells, like the Leydig cells. And what's interesting here is sperm mature from the outside in. So as they get here towards the center or the lumen, this is where you'll see the mature sperm. So the head down here contains the nucleus. Obviously, we need the genetic information. And the acrosome, this is like the tip right here, holds the enzyme to penetrate the egg if it reaches the egg. This middle piece right here is where the mitochondria is. So it can use that fructose to make ATP, so it has energy to whip his little tail. And you can see there's not a lot going on here besides that. They lose a lot of their cytoplasm and organelles as they mature. And by the time they mature and are ready to go, they're basically just a DNA delivery package. So don't have a lot of organelles, which means they're not going to live very long after they mature. So here you can see we're going from the outside in, and they mature as they get towards the center here. So male hormonal regulation is controlled by the hypothalamus in the brain, and this secretes gonadotropin releasing hormone. And I'm going to write it out for now. Oops, gonado, that's a D. Often abbreviated as this, GnRH, which stimulates this next step, the anterior pituitary gland, also located in the brain, to release gonadotropins, which are follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So FSH and LH, and these will come up in both male and female reproduction. So with males, FSH stimulates Sertoli cells to produce sperm. Those little nursing cells. Specifically sperm packaging and maturation. Getting them ready to rock and roll. So if you can remember the 8 or the S in FSH and then the S in Sertoli cells, that might be helpful. So it stimulates Sertoli cells to produce sperm. There's a lot of S's going on there, maybe that can help. And luteinizing hormone, or LH, stimulates Leydig cells to produce testosterone. Testosterone. And the testosterone activates the mitosis and meiosis steps. And you don't need to know this, but the FSH and LH is a negative feedback loop because as their products increase, their feedback to the hypothalamus will cause it to stop producing the gonadotropin releasing hormone. So I'm just going to put over here negative feedback just to tie in our other stuff that we've learned. Wow. What did I write there? Oh, negative feedback. I'm sorry for my handwriting. All right. On to the female reproductive tract. So first thing we're going to talk about are the ovaries. This is where we get production of eggs and follicles, and also the hormones progesterone and estrogen. down here in our diagram, this is a cross section and the ovaries are located right here. Remember, you have two, or females have two, one on each side. And next up is the oviduct. This is the duct to the uterus, and this is where we want fertilization to occur. So the union of the egg and the sperm, that is where it is, I should say, supposed to happen. That's not where it always happens. But in our picture down here, from the cross section, we've got the oviduct right here. And it leads to the uterus, which you see pictured here. And over here we've got the ovaries and the oviducts and then the uterus here. Fimbriae catch the egg after ovulation. So here you can see the fimbriae, not super great, but right here you can see they're kind of little finger-like projections, and they engorge with blood and do a sweeping motion. I'm not putting my hand there. I was gonna be mature. Oh my gosh. Okay. And do a sweeping motion during ovulation to try to catch the egg because it's not actually connected to the ovary there. So it needs to grab the egg so it can get to the ovary. First of all, this picture, why? Like, who did this to me? I don't necessarily design these packets, by the way. I mean, the anatomy is great, but just, I was talking to my coworker at my 7th grade school, and I was like, can I just put a sticky note over this? Because that's what we would do in 7th grade, something like this, just like duct tape a sticky note down. Okay, I'm getting off track here. Uterus is a muscular organ. So again, this is the uterus here. That's where a baby would grow inside if pregnancy were to occur. And it's lined with the endometrium, which is a vascular inner lining where an embryo implants if pregnancy occurs. And this is going to thicken and thin during the menstrual cycle. Next up in this female journey is the cervix. So if you've ever had a pap smear or heard of someone getting a pap smear, that's what they're gathering cells from, is right here. It's kind of the space between the uterus and the vagina here. And they're checking for cervical cancer. And if you've had kids or if you're 18 or older, you've probably had one, and it's not a comfortable feeling for them to go up there and get their little scrapey thing and scrape off the cells, but it's important to be done because it is a good, I don't want to say preventative, but anyway, a good way to keep cervical cancer in check. So, cells from here are what they take in a pap smear to check for cervical cancer. And also, we might get into this in the next lecture, but when you're having a baby and they see, when you're in labor and they see like how many centimeters dilated you are. You've probably heard that. They're checking how far open the cervix is so the baby can come out and go through the vaginal birth canal. Okay, the vagina is the opening for birth and intercourse. And it has mucous membranes and folds to allow for expansion because you're going to squeeze a baby out of there. And it has bacteria that make it acidic. And earlier on, where was that? Sorry, I'm bending over here. Oh, the prostate gland makes semen more basic, I think to counteract the acidity of the vagina. So now just to some exciting anatomy here. The vulva is the fold of skin which covers the vaginal opening. Which includes the labia and the clitoris. And the clitoris, I'll let you locate it here on this picture, is the erectile tissue of the female anatomy. And there is a concentration of nerve endings here. Okay, that's about as bad as it gets as far as pictures go. Wasn't too bad, right? So now let's move on to oogenesis. The two O's together refer to an egg or an ovum, and again, genesis is like the beginning or the creation of. So this is the creation of the eggs, and this is going to generate one large egg, and the other copies dissolve into polar bodies. So this process that forms this is meiosis, and so you would expect there to be 4 cells, but the other 3 dissolve into polar bodies and you're left with just one large egg cell. So it's kind of like all the resources are going to that one egg cell. And polar bodies are cells that are cell copies that are just discarded. And I'll try to zoom in on this a little bit. I don't have the best zoom on this camera, but that's about as good as we'll get here. So females are born with all the eggs they will ever have. They were formed during gestation. And so you have a primary oocyte here with 46 chromosomes, so it's diploid, and it's arrested in, let me check this real quick. I don't want to quote this wrong to you guys. So when you're born, meiosis is kind of frozen in prophase 1, which is just the very beginning. And then until you go through ovulation, which doesn't happen until puberty, ovulation is the releasing of the egg from the ovary. That's when you get the secondary oocyte. So it's now haploid, and the first polar body, and then it arrests here or stops here in metaphase 2. So we're still not even all the way through meiosis yet. And then in this portion is where fertilization would occur, the union of the egg and sperm. And then that's when we can finish meiosis 2. Sorry to bleed into my other stuff there. But yeah, main idea here, just recognize that females are born with all the eggs that they will have. They don't make any new eggs. And I want to say the number, and I'm sorry for not writing this down, is like 3 million. And they're all stopped here in prophase 1, still diploid. And then once puberty occurs and ovulation is when you get the meiosis starts to continue. And then fertilization, you finish meiosis 2. All right, so ovulation, the egg is contained within a follicle, and just think of the follicle as like a little package for the egg, and the follicle will become enlarged, and it's called a Graafian follicle with 2 A's and 1 F. Someone must have made a great discovery to get that named after them. And then the follicle will rupture and the egg is released. And I'll go over this in the diagram in a minute. And that empty follicle stays in the ovary and becomes the corpus luteum. And this will become a gland, which means it's going to secrete a hormone. And those hormones are progesterone and a little bit of estrogen. And to simplify things, just know, you don't have to know the estrogen part, but it does happen, but just know that corpus luteum secretes progesterone. So here I'll try to zoom in again a little bit. That's as far as it will go. We've got those primary follicles, which are developing into secondary follicles, and then you get the oocyte. You can see the little package around them, which is the follicle. And then this is where ovulation occurs. So the secondary oocyte is released. And then what's left of the follicle becomes the corpus luteum, which will secrete progesterone. All right, so hormones of the ovarian cycle. The hypothalamus releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone, same as with the male. And then look, we've got the follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, LH, coming back up again. So follicle-stimulating hormone in females does what it actually says, which is nice. It stimulates follicle growth. So hopefully that's easy to remember. And that follicle will secrete estrogen. the luteinizing hormone is going to trigger ovulation. And then that ruptured follicle becomes the corpus luteum. So again, there's a lot going on here, but in the brain you have the anterior pituitary, this front portion here, and it is going to release FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, which is going to stimulate that follicle to grow. As you can see it doing here, it's getting bigger. And that follicle is going to secrete estrogen. And then it also releases luteinizing hormone, which will trigger ovulation, so trigger that egg, that oocyte to come out. And then that ruptured follicle turns into the corpus luteum here, which will secrete progesterone. And I know this is a lot going on here, but we're going to help you. I'm going to help you the best I can when it comes exam time and the study guide and whatnot. So, but you do need to know this. And this chart kind of ties it all together. So I'm going to star this baby. All right, so let's talk about the cycle here. It's usually about 28 days long on average. So this chart here is showing from days 1 to 28. And day 1 is the day that you start your period, menstruation. So FSH activates the follicle and causes release of estrogen. And sorry, one second. And estrogen is going to tell the hypothalamus to do two things. Oh, my pen, I'm so sorry. To stop stimulating FSH and start stimulating LH. And that LH surge triggers ovulation at day 14, about halfway through the cycle. So I'm going to go through the rest of this and then we'll come back to the chart and kind of tie it all together. So that's the first 14 days of the cycle. Now the second half, second 14 days of the cycle, LH produces the corpus luteum, which is that kind of leftover follicle after ovulation, which secretes progesterone, inhibits further release of FSH and LH. This will also cause a thick mucus to form on the endometrium to catch the egg if there is a pregnancy. And this causes the endometrium to grow. And you'll see an increase in blood vessels. So remember, the endometrium is the lining of the uterus. And so it's going to grow to prepare to for an embryo to attach should pregnancy occur. So it can grow there. So we need an increase in blood vessels and blood supply. But if there is no pregnancy, the corpus luteum will regress and you'll see a decrease in progesterone. And what this causes is vasoconstriction of the endometrium. So vasoconstriction, you're making the vessels smaller. So essentially you're cutting off the blood supply or making it less. And this causes the cells to die and slough off. And exit through your vagina. And that's what your period is. I should word that differently. That's what a female's period is. Okay, at this point, FSH and LH are no longer inhibited. So we can start the cycle over again. The follicle is stimulated to develop. And the follicle will ovulate again on day 14. So again, we'll zoom in on this chart the best we can. So this is showing the ovarian cycle, so what's happening in the ovaries, and then the uterine cycle, what's happening in the uterus. And it's showing, as far as the ovaries go, the concentration of the hormone levels of FSH and LH, and what is happening with the follicles in the ovary. And then down here, it's showing what's happening in the uterus and what the hormones there are doing. So first 14 days, right here, we're looking at the first half. So FSH activates the follicle, causing it to develop. Okay, so developing, you get a mature follicle. This causes a release of estrogen. So as that is developing, you can see the estrogen go up here. And that's going to stop stimulating FSH. And you can see there is a little peak here, but you can just kind of ignore that. But FSH overall is going down. And to start stimulating LH. So we got a big peak right there at ovulation. So that LH surge is what triggers ovulation. Okay, as far as what's happening in the uterus, day 1 is menstruation. So this is when you're sloughing off those dead cells of the endometrium. And then the proliferative phase, you don't need to know that word, but it's when it's starting to build back up to start the cycle again. And then ovulation occurs. And let's look at the second 14 days of the cycle now. So the LH produces the corpus luteum after ovulation, which secretes progesterone. So we see our progesterone levels rising here. And it inhibits further release of FSH and LH. So you can see these are starting to go down on the second half. And this causes the endometrium to grow, increase in blood vessels. And if there is a pregnancy that occurs, that's what we'll talk about next time. But when there's not, actually I think it's on the next page, you get vasoconstriction these cells die and slough off, and that's your period. And then you'll have a decrease in progesterone that you see here. And the corpus luteum regresses, it starts to disappear. FSH and LH are no longer inhibited, so it's going to kind of go back to the starting level here as that cycle starts over again. And so the follicle again is stimulated to develop, and the follicle will ovulate. I know, it's a lot, I know. But don't worry, when test time comes, I'm hoping that the study guide will be helpful to you guys and you won't feel so stressed. But there it is. There it is, the menstrual cycle. A little bit on pregnancy. If embryo implantation occurs, so if an egg is fertilized, and usually about a week later, it implants into the uterus. And just so you know, a sperm can survive 5 days in the female tract. So even if the female hasn't ovulated at the time of ejaculation, that sperm can still be hiding out in there 5 days later and can still result in pregnancy. So if embryo implantation occurs, which is about a week after fertilization, the placenta produces, I'm going to write out the full name here, human chorionic gonadotropin. Also known as HCG, which you are probably more familiar with. And the HCG, I'll slow down, sorry. The HCG maintains the endometrium because we don't want it to slough off because we want the baby to stay there and grow. And in case you didn't know, you don't have periods during your pregnancy, and that's why, because your endometrium is, if it sloughs off, the baby goes with it. And this is going to keep progesterone high to support the pregnancy. It's going to inhibit FSH and LH. We don't want to stimulate any more follicles or ovulation because we already have a baby growing there. And it keeps the endometrium thick with lots of blood vessels to nourish the baby. And again, I think human development is coming up soon where we talk more about that. So we have made it to our question of the day. And again, this picture's got me like, really, but it does the job. So how do vasectomies and birth controls work? So a vasectomy is when you cut and seal the vas deferens or the ductus deferens. So sperm cannot be ejaculated. And so they end up being stored and they die and get reabsorbed. So let's see where we're at here. We've got the testes where the sperm are created. We've got the epididymis here. Normally the sperm would travel through the vas deferens to the urethra to be ejaculated. But if you cut that, sperm can't get past that. You can still ejaculate, but there's no sperm in it. All right, birth control pills. And there are more methods than this, but that's just what we're talking about today. So birth control pills and several other birth control methods use these mechanisms. There's 3. So they contain estrogen and progesterone. Which inhibit or stop FSH and LH. So the follicles don't get stimulated. Let's say no follicles. And without LH, no ovulation. Guys, let me know if this pen is an issue. All my Sharpies ran out, and this is just what I stole from my school, borrowed from my school. But it kind of sounds scratchy. 2, it only allows the endometrium to only thicken a little bit, so an egg can't implant. And or it thickens the cervical mucus. Which prevents sperm entry. If it can't get past the uterus, it's not getting to the egg. Or the cervix, I'm sorry, not the uterus. We made it through. So good job. Let me know if you have any questions, and we will see you soon.